Hello, I'm Anna Welch. Welcome to State Library Victoria and our beautiful domed reading room. This library was founded by Redmond Barry, modelled on the South Kensington Museum, which is today the V&A, with a very strong ethos around being a resource for working people. And we're standing here in the original reading room, known as the Queen's Hall, named for Queen Victoria, which has recently reopened to the public after a period of restoration. And as you can see, it's a really beautiful and grand space. And so this is where all the collection was originally, and also display cabinets for exhibitions of books and collection items. Redmond Barry was a key figure in the founding of this library and also in the founding of the gallery, which is today the National Gallery of Victoria and the University of Melbourne. He was an Anglo-Irish Protestant lawyer who emigrated to the colonies in 1837, arriving in Melbourne in 1839. And he had a real, civic vision for this library and all the other institutions in which he was involved. And the library he saw as, to borrow his beautiful phrase, a great emporium of learning. So a place that was open to all, founded on the values of being free, secular and democratic, and a place where everybody, but particularly working people, could come to learn and improve their lives. So the collection was almost all on open access shelves, and absolutely anybody could come in as long as they were over the age of 14. He wasn't a big fan of children, and that they had clean hands, which is still something we prefer in our visitors today. The hands part, not so much the children. Children are very welcome here today. So we're here in the secure collection storage where all the heritage collections are kept at SLV. So that encompasses a lot of different types of material, photographic, pictorial, ephemeral, as well as books, of course. And we are near the section of rare children's books, which is a big component of the rare books collection and well used by researchers all over the place. And one of the highlights of the children's collection is the Ken Pound collections. Ken is a collector who's still active, but in 1994 the library acquired 25,000 volumes, which was the extent of his collection at that time. He had emigrated to Australia from the UK as a child, immediately sort of in the aftermath of World War II, and grew up in social care settings here, and as an adult developed a passion for collecting books for children, material for children published in Australia. So it's a really extraordinary collection, and we're just going to go and have a look at it on the shelves. What's really remarkable about Ken's collection is that he was interested in not only in published books, but in anything that was published for children's readership. So also ephemera, any kind of advertising that was aimed at children. And he really tried to be as comprehensive as he could in collecting everything that was created for children in Australia, from the beginning of the publishing industry here through to his own time. And within the published volumes, what's remarkable is that you can run your eye along the shelf and see many, many examples of the same title. And what will distinguish them is sometimes obvious from the shelf, that they're different bindings. But in other cases, you can't tell what the variant is until you open the book. They look identical on the outside, but it might be something as small as that one title page has a punctuation mark that's absent from another. And Ken's comprehensive collecting instinct meant that he acquired every different variant of every impression of every edition of every book he could trace that was published for children in Australia. So a really vital resource, and one that's used by many researchers in this field of book history and bibliography. So This is the John Emerson collection, which came to the library in 2015 as a bequest and was the most significant gift of rare books that the library has received in its 165-year history. John passed away in 2014. He'd been born in Melbourne in 1938, and he was originally trained as a nuclear physicist, and he undertook that study at Oxford University in the UK, and it was while he was there studying in England that he began his interest in collecting material relating to the English Civil War. And over the next 40 years of his life, he collected steadily in his area of interest, and the collection as a whole is one of the most significant of this type of material outside the collections of the Bodleian and the British Library. So political pamphlets were in fact the first thing he began to collect. That was his entry point into collecting, was these affordable political pamphlets. He also has a great collection of early news sheets, the Mercurius Civicus and other early news sheets from that period. He had an interest in fine bindings to an extent, and we'll look at a couple of special ones a bit later. In general, he tried to buy books in very fine condition, so he often bought more than one copy of a text to acquire a better copy, but he was also interested in acquiring multiple editions of texts, and that includes literary works from the period, so long runs of poems such as Philip Sidney's Arcadia. Also some fantastic editions of John Donne, and really the highlight, I suppose, or the focus of his collection were works by and around and about Charles I. And probably one of the most special highlights within the collection is this edition of the collected works of James I, which was specially bound for Charles at the time that he was the Prince of Wales. And you can see the feathers of the Prince of Wales there with his initials on this binding, which is an extraordinary, unique copy of this important text. John's collection came into this library in 2015, and actually the process of bringing it here was really complex because another part of the terms of John's bequest was to keep the books in his shelf order, and that was a challenge both logistically but also in some ways philosophically, because as a library, there tends to be a preference to keep collections using the Dewey system and not to have new prefixes or to separate collections within collections. But in this case, it's hugely important that we were able to agree to that term in his bequest, because what it allows us to do is really understand John as a collector. And so the subject of John as a collector is one of the other areas of research, quite aside from the books themselves and the period of history that they cover. So you can see here on the flags in each book that there's a new prefix for the Emerson collection, rare M, and a number which indicates for us which shelf it resided on in John's original library. So John also had a system of marking his books. His bookplate is present in all the volumes, but he also included a sort of accession number. So in this case, that tells us when he purchased the book. In this case, JE 6939 means this was the 39th book he purchased in 1969. So actually that was an early acquisition for him. He'd only really started collecting the year before, in 1968. So there's a lot of information in this collection for those who study provenance. Okay, so here we have the Wallace-Kersop collection, which I will just open up now. So we're here with the Wallace-Kersop collection, which sits right next to the John Emerson collection, which is quite lovely as they knew each other well when John was alive. Wallace, thankfully, is still very much with us. Professor Wallace-Kersop is the preeminent historian of the book in Australia. His specialist subject is in French literature, culture and language, and also in the history of the book trade in Australia. He is no doubt well known to many of you, a really significant supporter of the library over a large number of years. He's also very important in Australia and New Zealand as one of the founders of the Bibliographical Society of Australia and New Zealand, which had its first meeting here in the State Library buildings, in the boardroom, I believe. And Wallace is still a member, was a president of the Society for a very long time, continues to be a very active contributor to everything the Society undertakes. Since about 2015, he has begun donating his research collection of predominantly 17th and 18th century French books to the SLV. It's an extraordinary collection in its own right and a really wonderful counterbalance to the Emerson collection with its focus on English material. Between these two wonderful and generous collectors, they've increased our holdings of pre-1800 books by 50% in the last 5 years, which is pretty amazing when you think about the 165-year history that it took for us to get to that point before John and Wallace gifted us their collections. Another reason Wallace is very significant to us at the library is that he very generously has funded the Foxcroft Lecture, which is an annual lecture named after a significant librarian and bibliographer here at SLV, A.B. Foxcroft, who died in the 1930s. And the lecture series happens once a year. An invited expert comes to speak on a bibliographical topic, and many of the speakers you will know may even be with us today. And in 2013, Wallace and Joan also began the Foxcroft Fund, which is a special fund that enables people to donate specifically to support rare book acquisitions. So we're extremely grateful to Wallace and to Joan for their ongoing friendship and support of the library and of those of us who work in the collection over many years. SLV has the largest public collection of medieval manuscripts in Australia. Still, of course, not large by international standards, not by European standards. We have 24 complete volumes and a large number of fragments, the majority of which were purchased between the 20s and the 40s, some or quite a few using Felton bequest money, and many of them acquired as part of the sales of the collection of Thomas Phillips. This volume that I chose today as a highlight is the oldest book in our collection, and we think the oldest book in Australia. It's a late 11th century copy of Boethius's De Musica, which was copied probably in northern Italy in that period, and it's a significant early medieval witness to that text, and quite an extraordinary survivor, and an extraordinary book to find here in Melbourne, and a really significant manuscript in our collection with some wonderful diagrams in red and green ink, as you can see here. Quite a lot of disintegration of the green ink, as is quite common, but in other places it's still very fine and very legible. So the Boethius is the oldest book in our collection and perhaps in Australia. This is another in the medieval manuscripts collection which has a place of honour because it's believed to have been made for Lorenzo de' Medici. And one of its remarkable features is that it's still in its original Medici library binding, which was colour-coded, and red was the colour for histories. You can see it's a tooled leather binding. We're missing the clasps, but it's otherwise in quite remarkable condition. As I said, it's bound as a history, but it's a text that's now more commonly thought of as probably satirical. It's the Lives of the Augustan Caesars, which was written at the end of the 4th century or the early 5th century. Lorenzo's name doesn't appear in this book anywhere, but there are lots of clues as to his ownership. Immediately you can see on this beautiful title page the Medici arms in a number of places in this border. we can also see the broncone, the laurel branch, which runs all the way around this border, which was adopted by Cosimo as a symbol of the Medici family. It was also a symbol of victory and of course associated with the god Apollo. His personal motto, Le temps revient, the times return, is found in the banderole that runs around the broncone. And if we look very closely, it's a detail that's difficult to see today because of the tarnishing of the silver pigment, but the Orsini arms are found in the upper margin, and that is taken along with the date of the text, 1479, to be perhaps a sign that it was made as a gift for the anniversary of Lorenzo's marriage to Clarice Orsini. So quite a remarkable opening to this volume. It is believed to have been decorated by the Florentine workshop of Mariano del Bruno di Jacopo, and there's a number of other books associated with that workshop that were made for the Laurentian Library. So this is one of those. And I'll turn some pages so you can see some of the fabulous historiated initials, where we find portraits of the emperors whose lives are represented. There's one. It's in really fine condition as a volume. There are a number of the historiated initials which are particularly interesting because they depict a coin, the emperor's head on a coin, perhaps a coin that actually was in Lorenzo's collection. There we go, there's a coin. And of course this magnificent and very characteristically Florentine palette and style of border decoration. So these are some examples of the sorts of books that Wallace Kirsopp collects and which he is donating to us in an ongoing way, just showing some of his interests as a bibliographer and book historian. He is interested in large paper editions, so this is a great example of one of those. He is always interested in the materiality of the book and what that tells us about book structures, how things are made. So from that perspective, he's really interested in sort of broken down books where you can see traces of materials, spine linings, this sort of thing within the volumes. Majority of his books are 18th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century, but he does have some earlier material. This is a 16th century vellum binding, and it's missing its alum-tored ties, but a great example of a spine label as well, on a binding that's probably contemporaneous with the text. And then some examples over here of waste reuse in bindings, so manuscript waste in this one, a manuscript on vellum used as the binding itself in this case, some more printed waste on the inside as the paste down, and then other sorts of binding materials, so paper, domino paper bindings, and also stationers bindings. And this is a lovely example of a set in paper wrappers with original spine labels. Wall's also interested in the organisation of libraries and library history. So there's lots of information in these books that speak to his interests as a researcher and his focus as a collector. So today on the table we have two examples of embroidered bindings from the John Emerson collection, and one is one that John collected himself, and the other is one that we've recently added to the collection using the funds that John left for that purpose. So the first one, which John collected, is a 1636 edition of Richard Hooker's On the Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, and it's a 9th edition of the text. It's not particularly, there's nothing of note inside the volume, but what is of note is its incredible embroidered binding, which has this really distinctive raised wirework cartouche featuring a lion's head and cornucopia at the bottom, surrounded by coloured silk embroidery of 2 military figures, one on each side, and birds and flowers around them, also sequins, and the whole has been embroidered onto a base of white satin. It's very beautiful, but what's of interest in particular is that this binding has been matched with another that's in the British Library's collection, which is known to have been owned by Henrietta Maria, Charles I's queen. And this binding is missing its fly leaves and title page. Sorry, this book is missing those pages, which is an indication that something may have been cut out because it had either a dedication to Henrietta Maria or perhaps even a signature of hers. An incredible thing to have in the collection, and we're really excited then in 2019 to be able to add to it another that seems to have been made by the same workshop. So there were 5 known bindings associated with that workshop to date. The one that was already in John Emerson's collection, and then there were others in the Bodleian Libraries, the British Library and the Met. And now there's a 6th, which is also here in Melbourne in Emerson's collection, which is a 1634 Book of Common Prayer and Bible, published by Robert Barker. And this binding is also white satin with coloured silk threads and that distinctive cartouche of raised wire work, which in this case has had a little polish, which the other hasn't. So you can see it's a little shinier at present, but those distinctive lion heads really stand out. This binding has, rather than the military figures, has the figure of prosperity on the front and peace on the back. So we're really excited to add this embroidered binding to the others, and particularly to this one in John's collection. They're both part actually of a research project that has just commenced last year, which is funded by the Australian Research Council, and it's called a linkage grant, and it's a collaborative project between the SLV and researchers at the Australian National University, University of Newcastle, La Trobe University and University of Victoria, Wellington in New Zealand. My part in that project is to focus on researching the embroidered bindings in the collection. Overall, the project's going to have a number of sort of traditional research outputs in publications and seminars, but another exciting aspect to it is that in 2023 we'll be launching SLV's first Born Digital exhibition, which will focus on the Emerson collection, and we'll be exploring and using an innovative methodology to bring books to life in the digital sphere in a new way. So keep an eye on that one. We'll also be talking about that at the next Sharp conference in July. So the last thing I wanted to show you from our rare books collection is an example of the artist's books. The collection includes examples from all over the world and from different time periods, but I thought I'd focus on an Australian artist today. This is the work of Angela Cavalieri, and it's called La Città Continua, and it was published in 2009. It's a concertina book that folds out to more than 2 meters when it's fully extended. So it's a hand-printed lino cut with acrylic and pen and ink. And Angela, as an artist, she's Melbourne-based, of Italian heritage, and she's known for her large-scale works, which are often really layered, feature a really layered use of text in particular and language. And she's spoken often and written about how her Italian migrant heritage has played a really important role in her artistic practice. So this work, Le Città Continue, or Continuing Cities, is a response to Italo Calvino's work Le Città Invisibili, Invisible Cities. And Angela chose to respond to Calvino's text because of the way it gave her a sense of time and space, and of the notion of the doorway and text as a sort of gateway into a new world, an invisible space of imagination. So this is what the book looks like when sort of almost fully extended. And you can see that form of the archway of the door is really prominent when you see it repeated, and that sense of the infinite. And Angela, in her artist statement, which I'll just quote from, describes that in a really beautiful way. She writes, I wanted to create the sensation I often have when entering and re-entering a city. For me, it feels like a continuous journey, and although cities vary, it appears that you're in the same space and you can dissolve into it. Through the book, you are entering from one passageway into another, but they appear to be the same space. The arch symbolizes the passageway, and on opening the book, you view a large arch which slowly diminishes to the last page. So I thought this would be the perfect book with which to finish our virtual visit to SLV Rare Books today, in part because it's a great example of the fact that our rare books collection is really expansive, includes everything from medieval manuscripts all the way through to Australian artist books produced very recently. I think this form of the door, the archway, is a great way to conclude, in part, of course, because I hope you'll be walking through our real doors in real life at some point soon.